Thank you.
Thank you, Father Michael. Just as Father Michael explained, we met before, and he plays a very important role in my spiritual development. Actually, we met each other in 2012 at Loyola University Chicago. I studied there. That was really interesting summer. I learned a lot about their community, and then get back to my job in the Beijing Center. So let's introduce myself a little bit more. My name is Andrea Zhou. I am Chinese. I'm a Chinese staff who's working in international student development field. I'm a student affairs professional. As Father Michael mentioned that I am a PhD student, and my interested field to study and to research is Jesuit education, international branding. So if there's anyone in this workshop who's interested in this field, please contact me. We'll talk. As a student affairs professional, I work with students on their pre-arrival experience as well as their orientation. So those are the most important two opponents that I'm working with international students recently. And I also supervise residence life in our center to kind of make sure our students have a good on-campus living experience or off-campus living experience in the United States. I also work on a little bit on student programming to make sure they are connected with American University and engaged with local students. Because I speak Chinese, because I am currently working with all international students, not just Chinese students, but because I speak Chinese and came from China, so I have some natural connections with Chinese students. That's why I'm kind of working a little bit on China market to do marketing trainings for our Chinese agents. And next week, I'll also talk about the recruiting, what's a recruitment look like in China now. Father Michael introduced my work experience. I have been working in this field for over 11 years, actually. This year is my 11 years working in this field. I worked for the Beijing Center before, which is Jesuit Institute in Beijing, and now I'm working for St. Louis University with a scope of international students, not just China. Saudi Arabia is a huge component, students from India, Koreans, students all around. Here I am now going to talking about one really interesting question. Who is Chinese students? So usually people will think this is such a simple question. Why you're asking this question? Chinese students are students from China. No. So traditional definition is kind of related to student nationality. We identify international students as those students whose nationality is not American. But when we identify Chinese students, we'll go and say, okay, you're holding a Chinese passport, you're a Chinese students. That's our traditional way to identify Chinese students. But I have been working with so many students are marginalized in this group. For example, I've been working with a bunch of green card holders who are first generation immigration, came to United States after they're teenagers, like when they're 15, 16, they moved to US, finished their high school, then came to university. So those students are not identified as Chinese students at all because they're probably holding US passport, or they're green card holders. They're not really identified as Chinese students. But are they Chinese students? I think they identify themselves as Chinese students as well. So here I bring up a little bit like new cultural definition is those students who identify themselves as Chinese students should be Chinese students. It's a little bit weird because we value students' self-identification. That's the most important information I want to share with you. there are some students, even though their citizenship are China, they probably didn't really identify themselves as Chinese students. Those students who probably finished their secondary education in US, they probably hang out with American students all the time. They never identify themselves as international students. But those students who's holding green cards or having have US passports, but finish their secondary education in China, they may just identify themselves as Chinese students. Just think about this frontier and the borderline. Who are the scope of Chinese students is actually really important question, because you may include wrong students in this scope, or you may forgot some students in this scope. That's why every time when I'm talking about Chinese students, I always think about who are Chinese students first. So this is what I'm trying to say today. So think about Chinese education system. I know there are many people sitting here are all as experts for China or are really interested in China. But I just want to kind of briefly introduce like what is a Chinese education system. Here I said Chinese students are defined as students attended some Chinese schools. So even though they attended Chinese schools a little bit, but they might identify themselves as Chinese students. So China has a slightly different education system than United States, but have a lot of similarities. Here I listed a primary school in China is 6 years. Secondary education is 3 years of a middle school, 3 years of a high school. So after this 12 years of education, they are qualified to take Chinese Gaokao, which is like similar as SAT. It's a university entering exam. So they must take those 12 years education to be able to take the entering university exams. So that's one information. And in China, there are both public schools and private schools. Even though public schools is definitely the majority, and the private school is it's a small portion. But I just want to list this here because many private schools are actually designed as they called international school, but those schools who are educating students in a more Western way. So that's why I put them here for you to better understand what that look like. Because in public school obviously are schools sponsored by the government, so they have to follow the certain curriculum. So their curriculums are designed by the government, so they have to follow their curriculums. But private school have a little bit more freedom. So if they are about to send students to study abroad after their middle school and high school study, they can actually design specific curriculum to fit for student future study. So there are many international schools in China are having AP classes, a good number actually. So that's why I want to bring private schools here, because many Chinese students studying in United States are coming actually from private middle school and high schools. In our next workshop, one of my friend who's also working in student recruitment field, will talk about her experience in recruiting students in private high schools. That's a very interesting experience. So just list here. After 12 years of education, secondary education, they can actually go to universities. In China, there are universities, there are like 20,000 universities in China. So there are like very clearly, there is a very clear category for Chinese universities from tier 1 to tier 4. And only tier 1 and 2 are considered as good university. So I would say tier 3 and 4 are kind of a similar value as a community university and associate degrees. in states. Although they call differently, they call that's a whole degree. They call it a university, but I mean the value in the market is actually more close to the community school. And also, I want to say the Chinese education has a slightly different purpose. That's my understanding. Than US education system. Their main purpose is to filter students. So through this entering exam, they filter students and only nutrish those students are in tier 1, tier 2. So some students are not able to go to tier 1, 2 universities, wouldn't get enough resources as they want. So this is the truth in Chinese higher education system. China also have community university and the professional community college and professional universities. They sometimes call it university or sometimes call it school, but that's all university level, higher education level. They call it differently, mainly to train like nurse or a professional cook, those type of vocation plans. Those are considered as a lowest higher education options. I also want to show you a quick data. I'm sure this is a quite familiar data for everyone. This shows how many Chinese students are studying in United States from 2008 to 2008 to 2018 to 19 academic year, the past 10-year status. You will see an increase. On this data, I want to mention one information that I see another piece of data in our internal report says out of the number of Chinese students who study in United States, we need to be mindful that the good number of students are minors. So in another word, the U.S. study abroad industry attracted a lot of young Chinese students. So not only higher education, so not only students going to undergraduate or graduate study, a lot of the Chinese students who went to States for their middle school and high school. And when it turned to middle school and high school application market, US is definitely the number 1 choice. But not in undergraduate and graduate. This year in 2020, Great Britain and Canada are all like number 1 and number 2 for undergraduate and graduate application. It's all over the applications, all have more applications than United States. But definitely in the younger students, the minors market, United States is definitely number 1. So this is another piece of data I want to mention here. Okay, another question is why students study abroad in United States, why they chose US as their study abroad study abroad place location. The first information I want to see is Chinese students study abroad in US since 1909. So after a war agreement, there are hundreds of government-sponsored Chinese students went to United States to study abroad. And many of them went to like really good universities like Harvard, Stanford, Duke University. And when they graduate and coming back to China, they became the industry leaders. So since then, they kind of connected American university and American education with successful. So American university means a successful life. So since then, they connected these two concepts together in many ways. And also, because of this, there are many universities that started to have a lot of exchange program with Chinese universities for a very long time. They have a really long history of establishing this type of exchange program. For example, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, they started to have exchange programs since 1950s, and they never stop those exchange programs. And now they are one of the most popular university for Chinese students to study abroad. And also why Chinese students chose American universities. Number one is definitely ranking. So if you say the world ranking for universities in the top 200, in the top 100, United States has probably about 1/3. And in the top 200, United States basically has like over about like 50%. So when it comes to the higher education industry, US is definitely like number one of the world with no doubt. So no other industry can compete with US for the ranking part. And also there are a lot of options in United States. Students can apply for a university, or they can apply for a community college, then they can still transfer back to university. That's are the options offered to Chinese students to come and study. That information I forgot to mention is in China, in Chinese education system, university level transfer is not possible. So if you're admitted in one Chinese university, you cannot transfer to another university, no matter how good you are. So transfer is basically not possible. But there are a lot of options here in the United States. There are so many schools, and from like big institution to smaller ones, from community college to full college, it's just a lot of options for them. Of course, US have customized education, advanced education system. Those are Chinese parents are looking for. And also another information Mr. Yan mentioned as well about sponsorship and government scholarship in 1980s. And also in Obama period, there's a lot of government sponsorship for Chinese students to study abroad. Not anymore, but back that time, there's a trend for Chinese universities to study abroad in US. Also, I want to mention that because of the quota system, there are a good number of Chinese students are not able to go to good universities or even get a degree in China. So here I put data for the past 3 years. This data is about how many Chinese students attended Gaokao and how many students are admitted. That's the admitted rate for Chinese universities. So this number, so this, I want to say the percentage. This number is admitted percentage, which means when a student applied, they received one offer. So this is like how many students receive offer. So you will see in 2018, there are about 20%, like a little bit less than 20% students never received any offer, which means they have no higher education to attend. They have no school to go, about 20%. And this number is about how many students are able to go to tier 1 and tier 2. So this number shows how many students are admitted into tier 1, tier 2 university. So in there, were in 2018, there are about over 50 students are not able to go to tier 1 and tier 2. So as I mentioned before, tier 1, tier 2, good school, tier 3, tier 4, community college. So that means like over 50% of students are not able to get good education as they want. So in terms of the numbers, this is the number, the unit is 10,000. So in terms of numbers, about like 500,000 Chinese students are not able to go to tier 1, tier 2 tier 2 university in 2018. So this is a number. There are so many students want to go to good education, good universities, but they couldn't go because of the quota system. So this is something I want to say for this part. So where is Chinese students, like how was their academic and the finance situation? For finance situation, I mean, there are lots of research about Chinese students' finance positions. I mean, there are so many different conclusions. I see a lot of different research regarding this, but overall, I would say most Chinese parents sponsor their kids to go to higher education, and they invest. They have a really good culture of invest children's education, especially in this one child generation. Their whole family are able to pull the resources together and support one kid. So this is very important information because many American staff and faculty think, okay, Chinese students, those students are from wealthy family. That's not true. But are they from like poor families? No, they're not. Most of them are from like middle class or to upper middle class, something like that. None of them are like really like poor. But you also need to understand that's a whole family resources, not probably one person's resource. Another piece I want to share here is mainly because came from my experience. Why Chinese students chose Jesuit school? I wish there are some students telling me that I chose St. Louis University because I'm a Catholic. I want to, because this is a Jesuit school, but I never heard this in the past 4 years. Never ever. There are some students from Taiwan told me that they came to St. Louis University because this is a Jesuit. But 99.9% of the students in China came to Jesuit school for ranking. So they know there are some schools have good overall ranking or specific program rankings are really high. For example, SLU has like really high international business school business program ranking. It's like ranked number 8 national-wide, so it's one of the best programs. So a lot of Chinese students coming for this ranking. Ranking is a big reason. Also, another good reason is the location. Oh, like everyone working in this field knows there are 5 cities are really popular for Chinese students: LA, San Francisco, New York, Boston, Chicago. Those are the 5 big cities Chinese students will always go to. So location is a good reason. If I know there are several Jesuit universities are in certain locations, have a good number of Chinese students applications. I know 10 years ago when I met the provost from Fordham University, he told me in 10 years ago, like in 2010, he told me in 2010, the number of Chinese students who apply for Fordham University is more than the number of students who applied for them from states. So more Chinese students applied for them than American university, like the American students. So that was in 2010. Can you believe that? I was so surprised by this number. That's 10 years ago even. Remember the curve I showed you 10 years ago, that's even in a lower area, and we have more and more. I don't know what's Fordham University look like now. I mean, they must have a lot of Chinese students. I think location is definitely a good reason. Faith, any students coming for certain faiths because they are Catholic or if they have certain faith, so they want to come to a faith, like come to a church-based university. I don't think so. And I always try to explain to my students and their parents when I was doing recruitment trip in China, I always tell them, Jesuit university doesn't mean you have to be, you have to become Catholic. We won't convert any students. this is always the first thing I tell them in my recruitment trip because they will worry about this. And I have to tell them this is something we'll never do. Just education. It's just education. It's whole person education, not about church, not about faith. So that's something I always mention. Another good information I want to bring here is, as I mentioned, there are a good number of minors, like high school, middle school students coming to study abroad in US. They sometimes chose Jesuit schools, Jesuit high schools, because they have like a boarding high school system, so they have place to live, or they have a host family system, so they have a family to live with. So that's a really good reason for them to apply for a Jesuit high school. Okay, I did a little bit research on how good Chinese students' English proficiency last week. It's really interesting because every time when they're talking about internal students, there are many people are saying, oh, internal students are those students whose English proficiency are really low. Actually, that's not true, because even in 10 years ago, the average TOEFL score, the English proficiency score of Chinese students have already higher than the minimum university requirements. So the average, the majority of students have already reached the minimum requirements by the American university. So the university think their English proficiency is good enough to go to undergraduate study. So their English proficiency is good enough to go to a university. So that's the information I want to share. In terms of a GPA, there's also a good number of data shows that the Chinese students' GPA is higher than American applicants in the same school. So their GPA is actually higher. But I'm also thinking of there are different systems in their high schools. So that probably hard to compare. It's compare apple with orange. It's just so different. But this is the information I want to share here. Their GPA are not low either. What's really missing in their profile is their volunteer service learning experience, or I would say out of a classroom experience. So many Chinese students didn't have enough out of classroom experience, including sports or volunteer experience or service learning experience or social justice experience, anything related to that. They basically have nothing in their profile. So this is something they don't have. Okay, I'll move to challenges. What are Chinese student challenges they're facing now? Culture shock, of course, everybody knows when coming to a new culture, there's a culture shock, but I would say the culture shock Chinese students are facing is probably even more than we think. So this is something I want to say. Also, even though there's two data, I couldn't remember the source, but I want to mention here, every 7 international students created 2 jobs in United States. And international students only takes 5% population of American universities, but they contribute to 30% of their incomes. However, with all of these contributions they're making, their school didn't create enough resources to support them. How many schools have a Chinese speaking staff? Very few. They might have Chinese speaking faculties that are different than staff in student support system. And other challenges are about their visas. I mean, in Obama period, when the 5-year visa policy came out, students are really happy about this decision. But when came back to Trump period, many of the political political privilege for Chinese students disappeared. Even though we didn't see a lot of visa deny in our school, but will I get my visa became one of the most frequent questions students will ask. So think about that. It's not about if they will get a visa, it's about if they're worried if they can get a visa. So that's very important because they're thinking when they apply to universities, think about they're facing a lot of options. They can apply school in US, they can go to Canada, they can go to Australia or other places, Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau, right? And when they apply for university in US, they're worried about their visa. So that's something put there will bring them back. So they will hesitate to apply for a university in States. That's not good. So that I always thinking about this. This is something we definitely should think of how to change in the future. There are all of the first year students have some transitioning challenges. That's the same with all of the students who attended university for the first year. That's quite normal. But I also want to mention that Chinese students are facing a larger rate of mental health risks than domestic students. There is data to support that. Lastly, this is my thoughts and my theory. I would say I think Chinese students are a hidden first generation, because when we are talking about first generation in American university settings, they're talking about students are the first one went to college in their whole family, right? So many Chinese students didn't really qualify for that because their parents have already went to college and university in China, but their experience in Chinese education is so different. So they still didn't get any information from their family. They didn't get any support from family about university norms, about their cultures, about the university clubs or housing experience. They still get zero, but they didn't identify as first generation. So they missed a lot of good opportunities that university created for first generation. So I call them a hidden first generation. COVID-19, that's something new. Students are facing more and more challenges in COVID-19. I can talk about this for a whole 2 hours, but things I want to mention is here is the visa policy changes during COVID-19 poses a lot of fear for students. So there are many students are thinking about, can I come back? Can I even come back? There are so many students went back to China after COVID in March or April-ish, and they couldn't come back. For online studies, it's been 6 months or even higher. Online fatigue is something everyone is facing. And time differences, we surveyed our students earlier in this semester. And first, for face-to-face students, their satisfaction rate is over 90% for our academic classes. But for a student who's doing online classes, their satisfaction rate is low, is about like 70%. So it's like 20% lower than face-to-face students. And this semester we have been facing so many issues for online students, only because time differences, they couldn't attend their classes. They have to be quarantined. They might get sick, just everything going on, and also internet, VPN issue. It's just really, really challenging for them during COVID time. Okay, that's all for me.